back. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.
How are you doing? I'm George Gordon in studio with Dr. Ted Venema, audiologist with NexGen Hearing. Ted, one of the things that you talk about in hearing loss is the trouble with treble. Explain that, would you?
That's the trouble with treble is usually where hearing loss is most commonly found. Treble. People can usually hear the bass, but it's the high-pitched sounds that are usually the first to go in hearing. In fact, a baby or a 10-year-old can hear sounds that are very, very high up in pitch, and we lose that as the decades of our lives go by. And when you hit about the age of 60, 65, it begins to invade the pitches of speech itself. And the sounds of speech that get affected are the high-pitched sounds of speech, like the letters S, S, and CH, ch, and F, F. All the sounds we make with our tongue and lips, those sounds become difficult to hear. And the hearing loss that is associated with aging is called presbycusis. And that sounds a bit like Presbyterian. Well, yeah, Presbyterian would mean Church of the Elders as opposed to the deacons.
Right.
Presbyopia would mean your arms aren't long enough to see the page.
I see.
And presbyopia tends to hit you when you're around 40. You can't see stuff close up anymore.
Right.
And presbycusis is hearing loss in the elderly. So presby would be the Greek word for elder. And presbycusis is by far the most common cause of hearing loss in the world. A third of people over 65 have it. Half of people over 75 have it, and 2/3 of people have it at 85. I mean, it's just the way it is. And you lose treble hearing. I could tell you a story about a guy in Wales who made something called the mosquito. And this was a little speaker that was emitted from his drugstore. He didn't want kids hanging around his drugstore.
All right.
So this thing would emit an extremely high-pitched sound that the teenagers would be gritting their teeth. They'd be going, "Let's get out of here." There's this, but the adults couldn't hear it anymore. I mean, and they were 40 or 50 years old. They couldn't hear it anymore. So presbycusis is a natural. I think that's a devious solution, by the way. I think I love the ingeniousness of it. But at any rate, presbycusis is a fact of life, and that's why I just call it the trouble with treble. Because when you lose treble, you lose the clarity, and your complaint is, "I can hear, I just can't tell what they said." I mean, if you think of the dishes or fishes, or think of the words hat, fat, sat, bat, cat, they all have ah. But ah is a relatively loud and low-pitched sound. The consonants, they tell you what the word is. And those consonants are high-pitched. And presbycusis is high-pitch hearing loss. And so people say, "Oh, kids are mumbling today." They just are. Well, it's true. A lot of people do mumble. And they should learn diction to speak clearly. But the coin has two sides. The other half of the coin is, you know what? A lot of people have high-pitch hearing loss. And only about 20% of people who should wear hearing aids do wear hearing aids. And hearing aids are not these big, beige, plastic, ugly things. Hearing aids are digital. They're programmed on a computer. You can't even see them. So the time to put things off is past us. It's silly because, as Mark said, there's nothing to lose by trying hearing aids. And early intervention is by far and away the best approach. I mean, people tend to wait for years until it gets so bad they don't know what to do with it, And then when they wear hearing aids, it's such a huge shock to get used to them. Why not and when you're starting to get symptoms of it, get a hearing test. It's free. Information is free. And then get more knowledge about what's going on. NexGen people love explaining things. And when you've got an explanation, your whole stance is different. You're looking at the whole scene differently because now you're armed with information. That's something. The second most common cause of hearing loss is noise-induced hearing
Boy,
loss.
are we in a noisy society today.
People don't stare in the sun because you're going to ruin your eyes. But for some reason, people think the ear is impervious to the ravages of noise. Hearing loss due to noise is also permanent. You can't fix it. It's gone. So they're getting early presbycusis. And noise-induced hearing loss, again, is treble hearing loss. It affects always the treble. And the interesting reason why it always affects treble, it's really interesting, is sounds enter that inner ear. You have the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. Your outer ear just gathers sound. Your middle ear is the three tiny little bones, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. They vibrate and deliver sound to this tiny inner ear, a snail-shaped organ. It's about as big as your pinky fingernail, just the tip of your pinky. And that thing's got 15,000 tiny little hair cells inside. And when those hair cells get blown over, you've got hearing loss. And when you've gone to a concert and your ears are ringing, those blades or those little hairs are blown over. Now overnight, they'll stand back up again. So the ringing in your ears will go away. But you keep walking on the grass and you'll wear a path. And now you've got hearing loss. And noise-induced hearing loss is the second most common cause of hearing loss. And the sad thing about it is it's so preventable. You know,
it is. It's amazing, and we tend to think of, if we're talking about sound pollution and the constant exposure to it, and we think of heavy traffic, we think of industrial, we think of big crowds yelling. But the simple when you talked about concerts, which are fairly common, some of the groups now issue earplugs, so that people don't, because they can be loud,
and they've gotten hearing loss themselves. In the group or band, because some members like Pete Townsend of The Who and various, you know, they know they've got high pitch hearing loss, and they stand as ambassadors trying to protect the public from doing what they did, namely not protecting your hearing. So I mean, it's such a common thing to lose hearing. Elderly people in Africa have better hearing than elderly people in North America, and the reason why is they have less industrial noise pollution. Noise, if you can hear someone's headphones and you're not listening to the headphones, but you can hear their headphones, imagine the deafening blast that's hitting their eardrums. And our ears were meant to hear soft voices over the crackling of a fire. We were never meant to hear steel on steel. You know, and that's
it's what's interesting when you're just talking about this, when we're talking about concerts and so on. And while we call this Boomer Life, the next generation that's coming up behind, that, as I call the earbud generation, that they've got their plugged into their phones and they're listening to their music and so on, and you can hear them.
Yes.
From like you'll have another generation.
Oh, yeah.
Is that why we call it NexGen here?
Yep. You know, I've gone to grade 6 classes. And I used to live in Ontario. And I used to go to grade 6 classes, and they're young enough to be impressionable and old enough to know. You hit them right there. And I would talk about noise damage and pollution, noise pollution to their ears. And I would say, take your iPad or iPod or whatever and crank it up to a volume you like. And then I would hold a sound level meter by it. And it would be like well over 100 decibels.
Wow.
And we'd show a little video about hair cells being damaged and stuff like that.
Right.
But an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. But in a nutshell, it's presbycusis and noise-induced hearing loss, which is like 95% of hearing loss, is treble. It's always the trouble with treble. All sounds have to enter the doorway of that inner ear, that snail shell, and it's the treble hair cells that are at the doorway. It's like the carpet in front of your door gets dirty first. That's why you put a mat there. It's natural that the treble goes first. But when you lose the treble, you've got trouble hearing what someone said. Not that someone's speaking, but what word did they say?
And I thought it was interesting what Mark had to say about what loss of hearing can lead to if you become disassociated with the rest of the world because you can't. The impact on your quality of life,
of course, isolation,
and even your mental health.
Sure, it's associated with cognitive decline. I mean, let's face it. I mean, someone who's left in isolation, cut off from communication. Helen Keller said hearing connects people to other people. She was deaf and blind. Vision connects you to things. Hearing loss cuts you off from other people. So, and it's that communication. It affects relationships. Hearing loss is the one loss that necessarily not only affects the person who has it, but it affects people around him or her, because it involves communication. So it's when people lose hearing, they're tired of being ribbed about answering the wrong punchline to a joke. They are embarrassed by it, and so they say, you guys go on out and have a good time. I'll stay back. I'm kind of tired. I'll read a book. And that's sad.
It is.
Because you can do something.
You lose some great minds. You lose family.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. So it's so easy today to do something about it. It's just, to get off one's rusty dusty and actually check it out, because the information is free. And as Mark said, the first 21 days, you're walking out with a pair of hearing aids and you haven't plunked down a nickel. I should say a penny, but we don't use those anymore. But you've got 3 weeks to check them out, like with someone else's merchandise you're walking around with. I mean, there's nothing to lose by trying.
Boomer Life today, we're talking about hearing, and with us in studio is audiologist Dr. Ted Venema. We've talked about the trouble with treble, presbycusis. I only said that because I've been practicing all week to learn how to say it. When we come back, let's talk about the comparison between vision loss and hearing.
Yeah, that's a good segue for sure.
All right. If you want some more information on what NexGen Hearing is about, nextgenhearing.com. This show will be on the podcast. If you go to CL 650 and then go to Talk, you'll find us in there. We'll be right back with Boomer Life on CL 650.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.